The autumn wind swept through Central Park, carrying dried leaves past the worn bench where twin boys sat quietly. Zach and Lucas Wilson, identical down to the freckles scattered across their noses, huddled together against the morning chill. Between them rested a shiny red toy car, weathered at the edges but still gleaming where the sun caught its surface. "Someone's gotta want it," Zach whispered, his small hands nervously turning the toy. "It's the coolest car ever." Lucas nodded, swallowing hard as he scanned the passing crowd. His stomach rumbled, but he ignored it. They hadn't eaten since yesterday's meager breakfast, but food wasn't the priority now. Not with their mother lying pale and weak in their tiny apartment. "Let's try over there," Lucas suggested, pointing toward the busier path where business people hurried to work. The twins positioned themselves strategically, summoning courage beyond their 10 years. Their identical blue eyes, serious and determined, watched each passerby with desperate hope. "Excuse me, sir," Zach called to a man in an expensive suit. "Would you like to buy our car? It's really special." The man walked past without acknowledging them. This pattern repeated throughout the morning, people rushing by, some offering pitying glances, others pretending not to see them at all. "Need to try harder," Lucas said finally, his voice breaking. "Mom needs the medicine today." Across the park, a tall figure emerged from a sleek black car. Blake Harrison adjusted his custom-tailored suit jacket, nodding curtly as his driver confirmed his afternoon meeting schedule. At 42, Blake had built Harrison Industries into a global technology empire, his name synonymous with innovation and ruthless business acumen. "I'll walk through the park," he told his driver. "Meet me on the east side in 15 minutes. Blake moved with purpose, his expression neutral as he mentally reviewed quarterly projections. He barely registered the people around him until a small voice cut through his thoughts. "Sir? Would you buy our car, please?" Blake's stride faltered. Something in that voice, its desperate sincerity, made him stop. He turned to see twin boys looking up at him, identical faces pinched with anxiety. One held out a toy car like it. It was a precious artifact. "We're selling it," the boy continued. "It's really fast and the door's even open." Blake found himself staring at the twins, an unexpected tightness forming in his chest. Something about their earnest faces, the careful way they handled the toy, as if parting with a treasure, resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. "How much?" Blake heard himself ask. The twins exchanged glances. "Whatever you can pay," the one holding the car answered. "We just need it for our mom. She's really sick." Blake's gaze lingered on the toy car. It was obviously cherished, clean, despite its age, with clear fingerprints showing where small hands had gripped it countless times. Without fully understanding why, he reached for his wallet and removed several large bills. "Here," he said, extending the money. "Will this help?" The boys' eyes widened at the amount, far more than they'd hoped for. Zach carefully placed the toy car in Blake's palm, his small fingers lingering for a moment before reluctantly pulling away. "Thank you, sir," Lucas said, his voice trembling with relief. "This will help our mom a lot." Blake pocketed the car, watching as the twins gripped the money tightly and hurried away. He should have continued his walk, returned to the day's agenda and forgotten this brief interaction. Instead, he found himself watching the boys' retreating figures, those identical heads bent together in urgent conversation. Blake turned to his driver, who had followed at a discreet distance. "Follow them," he said quietly, surprising himself with the command. "I want to see where they live." As his car moved slowly behind the hurrying twins, Blake stared at the toy car now resting in his hand. It had been years since anything had disrupted his carefully ordered existence. Years since he had felt this pull, this need to understand something beyond profit margins and strategic acquisitions. Blake Harrison didn't believe in fate or coincidence. But as he watched those twin boys through the tinted window, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something that would change everything. Blake's car followed the twins to a dilapidated apartment building in one of the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The contrast between his sleek vehicle and the crumbling surroundings couldn't have been starker. As the boys disappeared inside, Blake sat motionless, the toy car still in his hand. "Wait here," he told his driver, stepping out before he could reconsider. The building's stairwell smelled of mildew and despair. Blake climbed 4 flights, following the sound of excited children's voices until he reached a door with peeling paint. He hesitated, then knocked firmly. The door opened slightly, revealing one twin's suspicious face. "It's the man from the park," he called over his shoulder, eyes wide with confusion. The door opened wider. Both boys stood there, uncertainty written across their identical faces. Behind them, Blake glimpsed a small, sparse apartment and the outline of a woman lying on a mattress. "Can I come in?" Blake asked. His usual commanding tone softened. After a moment's hesitation, the boys stepped aside. Inside, the apartment was clean despite its poverty. What struck Blake most was what was missing. No excess, no comforts, just bare necessities. "My mom's sleeping," one twin whispered. Lucas, Blake thought, though he wasn't certain. Catherine Wilson lay on a thin mattress, her breathing labored, skin ashen against the worn sheets. Even in illness, her resemblance to her son's was unmistakable. The same delicate features, though her once vibrant face was now hollow with suffering. "How long has she been like this?" Blake asked quietly. "Weeks," Zach answered, his small shoulders sagging. "She gets worse every day." Blake knelt beside the mattress, gently touching Catherine's arm. Her skin burned with fever. "She needs a hospital," he said decisively. "We don't have money," Lucas replied, his voice small. "That's why we were selling our car." Blake looked at the toy still in his pocket, then at the desperate faces of the twins. Something inside him, something he thought long buried, stirred to life. "I'll take care of it," he said firmly. The boys exchanged glances. "How will we ever pay you back?" Zach asked, clutching the money they'd earned. Blake's expression softened unexpectedly. "You already sold me your car, remember? Now it's my turn to help." Without waiting for their response, Blake lifted Catherine gently in his arms. She mumbled something incoherent, too weak to resist. The twins followed anxiously as Blake carried their mother down the stairs and into his waiting car. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, holding his mother's limp hand. "To people who can help her," Blake answered, already dialing his phone. As the car pulled away, Blake found himself wondering what had possessed him to get involved. For years he'd built walls around himself, focused solely on his empire, avoiding anything that might reawaken the pain he'd buried so deeply. Yet something about these twins and their desperate situation had breached those defenses. Looking at their worried faces in the back seat, Blake understood with startling clarity that his carefully isolated life had just become irrevocably entangled with theirs. The emergency room doors slid open as Blake carried Catherine inside, the twins trailing anxiously behind. His commanding presence cut through the usual waiting procedures, and within minutes, doctors were examining Catherine while nurses guided the concerned boys to nearby chairs. "Severe dehydration, probable kidney failure," a doctor murmured, checking Catherine's vitals. "How long has she been like this?" "They say weeks," Blake replied, watching as the medical team worked with efficient urgency. "Will she recover?" The doctor's expression remained professionally neutral. "She needs immediate treatment. Are you family?" Blake hesitated only briefly. "Yes," he answered firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. Tests confirmed. The doctor's initial assessment: severe kidney disease requiring immediate dialysis. Blake authorized all necessary treatments without hesitation, signing forms and providing his insurance information as if he'd been caring for Catherine his entire life. Hours later, Blake found himself sitting between the exhausted twins in a quiet hospital corridor. The boys leaned against him, fighting sleep but losing the battle. Neither had left their mother's side until the doctors had insisted they step out during a procedure. "Is Mom going to die?" Lucas whispered, his small voice cracking. Blake looked down at the boy, seeing fear in those blue eyes that seemed far too wise for their years. "No," he said with certainty. She's getting the best care possible now. But what happens after? Zach asked, equally concerned. We can't stay at the hospital forever. The question hung in the air. Blake had been so focused on getting Catherine treatment that he hadn't considered what would come next. The thought of sending these children back to that barren apartment while their mother recovered was unthinkable. You'll come stay with me, Blake heard himself say, the words forming before he'd fully considered them. Just until your mother is better. The twins exchanged doubtful glances. Your house must be really big, Lucas said after a moment, trying to imagine it. It is, Blake confirmed, feeling strangely self-conscious about his wealth for the first time in years. Plenty of room for both of you. When Catherine was finally stabilized and sleeping, a nurse approached with paperwork and questions about childcare arrangements. Blake smoothly took charge, explaining that the boys would be staying with him. His confident tone left no room for argument or suspicion. As they prepared to leave, Blake watched the twins say goodbye to their unconscious mother, each placing a gentle kiss on her forehead with a tenderness that tightened his chest. These children, who had every reason to be broken by circumstance, showed a resilience and love that stirred something long dormant within him. The drive to Blake's estate was silent, the twins pressed together in the back seat, occasionally whispering to each other as the city landscape gave way to manicured suburbs and eventually the private road leading to Blake's mansion. When the car stopped before the imposing structure, the boys' exhaustion momentarily lifted, replaced by awe at the sheer size of the house illuminated by subtle landscape lighting. You live here alone? Zach asked as they stepped out of the car. Blake nodded, suddenly seeing his home through their eyes, grand, impressive, and utterly empty of what truly mattered. Not tonight, he said quietly, leading them toward the massive front doors. Tonight, you're here too. Morning light streamed through tall windows as Zach and Lucas cautiously explored their temporary home. The mansion's grandeur overwhelmed them. Crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, artwork worth more than their entire life's possessions, and corridors leading to seemingly endless rooms. Do you think he has a pool? Lucas whispered, excitedly. Probably 3, Zach replied, running his hand along a marble banister. The boys had slept in a guest suite larger than their apartment, in beds so soft they'd felt like they were floating. Despite their concern for their mother, childish wonder temporarily overtook worry as they discovered each new corner of Blake's estate. Blake watched them from his study doorway, coffee in hand. He'd made several calls already, arranging for Catherine's continued treatment, postponing meetings, and instructing his housekeeper to purchase necessities for the twins. He couldn't explain his actions even to himself. The hospital called, Blake announced as the boys rounded a corner. Your mother is stable. She's responding well to treatment. Both faces lit up with identical expressions of relief. Can we see her today? Lucas asked hopefully. This afternoon, Blake promised. Have you eaten? The twins shook their heads. Blake led them to the kitchen, where his housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, had prepared breakfast. The woman raised an eyebrow at the unlikely houseguests, but said nothing, as she served plates piled with food. Eat, Blake instructed, checking his phone as messages accumulated. The boys needed no encouragement, devouring the meal with barely concealed desperation. Later, as Blake answered emails, he heard a commotion outside his study. You can't go in there, Mrs. Winters was saying firmly. Blake opened the door to find Zach attempting to peer around the housekeeper into a room at the end of the hall, a room Blake kept permanently locked. That door is always closed, Mrs. Winters explained apologetically. I tried to tell them. It's fine. Blake interrupted, his voice tight. To the twins, he added, that room is private, the rest of the house is yours to explore, but that room remains closed. Understood? Both boys nodded, chastened by his sudden coldness. That afternoon, Blake's driver took them to the hospital. Catherine was awake, though weak, her face brightening at the sight of her sons. My boys, she whispered, as they carefully hugged her. I was so worried. Mr. Harrison is letting us stay at his house, Mom, Lucas explained excitedly. It's huge. Catherine's eyes found Blake, standing uncomfortably at the doorway. I don't know how to thank you, she said softly. There's no need, Blake replied, stiffly. The doctor arrived with updates explaining Catherine's condition in simplified terms for the twins. Your mom's kidneys weren't working properly. We're helping them filter her blood while they heal. Will she get better? Zach asked, clutching his mother's hand. With continued treatment, yes, the doctor confirmed. But it will take time. On the drive back, the twins were quiet, processing their mother's condition. Why are you helping us? Lucas finally asked, breaking the silence. Blake stared out the window, watching the city pass. Why indeed? He'd spent years building walls around himself, focusing solely on his empire. Why risk pain by letting these strangers in? Sometimes people just need help, he answered eventually, avoiding the deeper truth. That night, after the twins were asleep, Blake stood before the locked door, key in hand. Inside was everything he'd tried to forget. Photos, toys, memories preserved like insects in amber. His fingers tightened around the key, then released. Not tonight. Perhaps not ever. Behind him, the house felt different. No longer just an empty monument to his success, but temporarily alive with the presence of children again. The sensation was both comforting and terrifying. A week passed, settling into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, Blake found himself waking earlier than usual, listening for the sounds of life in his formerly silent home. The twins' footsteps, their whispered conversations, even their occasional disagreements had become part of the mansion's new soundtrack. Blake's staff adapted with professional efficiency, though not without curiosity. Mrs. Winters stocked the kitchen with child-friendly foods, while the groundskeeper found himself answering endless questions about the gardens from two identical shadows that followed him around. Mr. Harrison, Zach approached Blake as he worked in his home office. Can we visit Mom today? Blake checked his watch. We'll go after lunch. How's the room working out for you both? It's awesome, Zach replied, his eyes brightening. Lucas found a chess set in the closet. Do you play? Blake's fingers stilled on his keyboard. I used to. Could you teach us sometime? The boy's hopeful expression made declining impossible. Perhaps, Blake answered, returning to his work. Zach lingered a moment before retreating, leaving Blake alone with an unexpected surge of emotion. At the hospital, Catherine's improvement was evident. Color had returned to her cheeks, and she sat up, embracing her sons as they bounded into the room. The doctors say I'm responding well to treatment, she told Blake as the twins explored the small hospital room. I don't know how I'll ever repay. Don't, Blake interrupted. Focus on recovery. Later, as the twins chatted animatedly with a nurse, Catherine studied Blake more carefully. You don't have children of your own? She asked quietly. Blake's posture stiffened. No, he answered. Then after a pause, not anymore. Catherine's eyes widened slightly at the implication, but before she could respond, Lucas called for her attention, breaking the moment. That evening, dinner at the mansion was interrupted by a crash from the living room. Blake and Mrs. Winters rushed in to find Zach standing horrified before the shattered remains of an antique vase. I'm sorry, the boy stammered, eyes wide with fear. I was just looking. I didn't mean to. Blake surveyed the damage. The vase, a rare piece he'd acquired at auction years ago, lay in irreparable pieces. Are you hurt? He asked calmly. Zach shook his head, clearly expecting punishment. Good, Blake said. Mrs. Winters, please clean this up. To Zach's astonishment, Blake simply turned and walked back toward the dining room. Aren't you mad? Zach asked, following cautiously. Blake paused. It's just a thing, he said. Things can be replaced. Later that night, unable to sleep, Blake wandered the darkened house. Passing the twins' room, he heard soft sobbing. He hesitated, then quietly opened the door. Lucas sat awake in bed, tears streaming down his face. Zach slept soundly in the adjacent bed. What's wrong? Blake asked, keeping his voice low. I miss Mom, Lucas whispered. What if she doesn't get better? Blake sat carefully on the edge of the bed. The doctors are very good. She's already improving. Lucas looked up, his tear-stained face vulnerable in the dim light. "Our dad died when we were 5. Mom said sometimes people just don't come back." The simple statement hit Blake with unexpected force. Without thinking, he reached out, awkwardly patting the boy's shoulder. "Your mother is coming back," he promised. "Try to sleep now." As he closed the door behind him, Blake felt something shift inside, a crack in the careful fortress he'd built around his heart, letting in both pain and something else he wasn't ready to name. 2 weeks into their stay, the mansion had transformed. Schoolbooks now littered the dining table as Blake had arranged for temporary homeschooling. Children's jackets hung beside expensive coats in the foyer. The pristine silence had given way to lively chatter and occasional laughter. Today brought news they'd all been waiting for. Catherine was being released for outpatient treatment. Blake's driver brought her directly from the hospital, the twins bouncing impatiently by the front door until they spotted the car approaching. "Mom!" they shouted in unison, rushing down the steps as Catherine emerged, still thin but standing straight. Color returned to her face. Blake watched from the doorway as the family embraced, feeling strangely like an outsider witnessing something precious. Catherine looked up, catching his eye, and smiled with genuine warmth. Something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. "Welcome," he said simply as they approached. "This is overwhelming," Catherine admitted, taking in the mansion's grandeur. "We can't possibly impose—" "You're not imposing," Blake interrupted. "The doctor said you need rest and continued treatment. This is the most practical arrangement." Mrs. Winters appeared, offering to show Catherine to her room. The twins immediately volunteered as tour guides, eager to show their mother everything they'd discovered. That evening, for the first time, all 4 ate dinner together. The twins dominated the conversation, updating Catherine on their temporary life, the gardens they'd explored, the chess lessons Blake had reluctantly begun giving them, the planets Blake's telescope could see. "You've been teaching them chess?" Catherine asked Blake during a rare pause. Blake nodded, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. They asked. "He's really good, Mom," Lucas added. "He says we're learning fast because we have good spatial." He looked at Blake for help. "Spatial reasoning," Blake supplied. Catherine smiled. "They've always been quick learners." Her expression turned serious. "But we need to discuss what happens next. The doctor says I'll need ongoing treatment for months, and I need to find work that can accommodate." "One step at a time," Blake interrupted. "Your treatment schedule is arranged, everything else can wait." Later, after the twins were asleep, Blake found Catherine in the library, examining family photos displayed on a shelf. Carefully curated images of Blake's parents and business, achievements with conspicuous gaps. "Thank you," she said without turning. "Not just for the medical care, but for making my boys feel safe. They've had so little stability." Blake remained in the doorway. "They're remarkable children." They mentioned a locked room, Catherine said carefully. "They think it might be filled with treasure." Blake's posture stiffened. "Just storage," he lied. Catherine turned, studying him with gentle perception. "I understand privacy, Mr. Harrison. We all have parts of ourselves we keep locked away." The simple understanding in her voice nearly undid him. For years, colleagues and associates had tiptoed around his past, treating him like a ticking bomb. Catherine's straightforward acknowledgement was disarming. "Blake," he said suddenly. "Please call me Blake." She nodded. "Blake, then." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unasked questions. "I should rest," Catherine finally said. "Good night, Blake." After she left, Blake poured himself a drink, contemplating how quickly these strangers had infiltrated his carefully constructed solitude. The most disturbing realization wasn't that he minded their presence, but that he was beginning to dread their eventual departure. Out of habit, his hand reached into his pocket where he still carried the twins' toy car. He examined it under the lamp's glow, running his thumb over its worn edges, wondering how something so small could have triggered such significant disruption to his life. Blake sat alone in his office, quarterly reports forgotten on his desk. Outside, he could hear the twins laughing as they kicked a soccer ball across the lawn. The sound penetrated the thick windows, infiltrating the sanctuary he'd maintained for years. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's release from the hospital. Her strength returned gradually, but her medical team insisted on continued rest between treatments. The temporary arrangement showed no signs of ending soon, a fact that left Blake increasingly conflicted. His phone buzzed with a message from his executive assistant. "Board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Confirm attendance?" Blake stared at the screen. He'd been working remotely, making occasional appearances at the office when necessary. His absence had sparked rumors, which his team managed efficiently. Yet the truth, that he, Blake Harrison, ruthless business titan, was playing host to a struggling single mother and her twins, would be incomprehensible to his colleagues. "Confirmed," he typed, then set the phone aside. The office door opened, slowly, and Lucas peered in. "Mr. Blake? Mom said to tell you dinner's ready." Catherine had insisted on cooking whenever she felt strong enough. To earn her keep, she'd explained, despite Blake's protests. Her simple, home-cooked meals had become strangely meaningful, bringing them together around the dining table each evening. "I'll be right there," Blake replied. Lucas hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" Blake nodded, gesturing for the boy to enter. "Why do you always keep that toy car in your pocket? The one we sold you." Blake's hand instinctively touched his jacket pocket where the small car indeed rested. He hadn't realized the boy had noticed. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly. Lucas approached, stopping respectfully before the desk. "It was our dad's. He gave it to us before he died." Blake felt a stab of guilt. "I didn't know. You should have it back." Lucas shook his head. "We sold it fair. Mom says a deal is a deal." He studied Blake curiously. "Did you have kids? Is that why you have that locked room?" The directness of the question knocked the air from Blake's lungs. In the corporate world, no one dared mention his past. So bluntly, "I did," he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "A son." What happened to him? Blake should have shut down the conversation, changed the subject, maintained the walls he'd built. Instead, he heard himself answer, "There was an accident, a car accident. He and my wife were killed." Lucas absorbed this with solemn understanding beyond his years. "That's why you helped us, isn't it? Because we reminded you of him." Blake looked away, uncomfortable with the boy's perception. "Perhaps. Mom says people come into our lives for a reason," Lucas continued. "Maybe we came into yours to help you too." Before Blake could respond, Zach appeared at the door. "Come on. Mom made spaghetti." Lucas smiled and followed his brother. At the doorway, he turned back. "You should come too, Mr. Blake. It's better when we're all together." Dinner that night was animated, the twins recounting their soccer game while Catherine smiled at their enthusiasm. Blake observed quietly, struck by how the formal dining room, previously used only for rare business dinners, had transformed into a space of genuine warmth. "The boys tell me you have a board meeting tomorrow," Catherine said as the twins cleared the dishes, insisting on helping despite Mrs. Winter's presence. "Yes," Blake confirmed. "I should be back by evening." Catherine nodded. "We'll manage fine. It's good for you to return to normal life." But as Blake looked around the table, he realized with startling clarity that this improvised family dinner with people who had been strangers weeks ago felt more like normal life than anything he'd experienced in years. The realization terrified him. The board meeting dragged interminably. Blake found himself checking his watch repeatedly, his mind wandering to the mansion and its temporary residents. When his CFO asked about quarterly projections, Blake had to request the question be repeated, an unprecedented lapse in his legendary focus. "Everything all right, Blake?" his COO asked during a break, genuine concern in his voice. "Fine," Blake replied curtly. "Let's finish this." By the time he returned home, evening had fallen. The mansion was unusually quiet as he entered. Following the sound of hushed voices, he found Catherine in the twins' room, sitting beside Zach's bed. "What happened?" Blake asked, seeing the boy's flushed face. "Fever," Catherine explained, worry etched in her features. It came on suddenly this afternoon. Zach managed a weak smile. Hi, Mr. Blake. Lucas sat cross-legged on his own bed, watching his brother anxiously. He threw up twice, he reported solemnly. Blake approached, noting Zach's glazed eyes and labored breathing. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed his personal physician. He'll be here in 20 minutes, Blake announced after a brief conversation. Catherine looked up, startled. A house call? That's not necessary. It is, Blake interrupted. We don't know if this is related to your condition or something contagious. Better to be cautious. The doctor confirmed it was just a common virus, prescribing rest and fluids. Yet even after this reassurance, Blake found himself returning to check on Zach throughout the night, an inexplicable anxiety gripping him each time he walked away. During Selma's one such visit, he found Catherine asleep in the chair beside Zach's bed, her hand still resting on her son's forehead. In sleep, the strain of recent months showed plainly on her face. Blake quietly draped a blanket over her shoulders, then stood watching both mother and child, an unfamiliar ache spreading through his chest. The next morning, Zach's fever had broken. Blake canceled his meetings again, working from home while periodically checking on the boy's recovery. By afternoon, Zach was sitting up, sipping ginger ale while Lucas entertained him with exaggerated stories. You didn't have to stay home, Catherine said, finding Blake in his study later. We could have managed. Blake looked up from his laptop. I wanted to be sure he was recovering. Catherine studied him with that perceptive gaze that always made him feel transparent. You care about them. It wasn't a question. Blake closed his laptop, struggling with how to respond. The boys have started calling you Mr. Blake instead of Mr. Harrison, she continued. They've become attached to you. And that concerns you, Blake surmised. Catherine sighed, sitting in the chair opposite his desk. We can't stay here forever, Blake. Eventually I'll be well enough to work again, to provide for my sons properly. And then, she left the sentence unfinished, but its conclusion hung heavily in the air. Then they would leave. Return to their own life. This temporary intersection would end. My treatments are working better than expected, Catherine continued, softly. The doctor says I might be ready for reduced sessions within a month. I've started looking at apartments we can afford. Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. There's no rush, he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. There is, Catherine countered gently. The longer we stay, the harder it will be for all of us when we leave. Blake had no response. In business, he never hesitated, never showed uncertainty. But this wasn't business. This was something he'd deliberately avoided for years. Emotional entanglement, the risk of caring too deeply. You've given us so much. Already, Catherine said, rising to leave. We can't take advantage of your generosity forever. As she reached the door, Blake finally spoke. And if I asked you to stay? The question surprised them both. Catherine turned, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Why would you? She asked softly. Blake had no answer, at least, none he was ready to voice aloud. That night, Blake stood before the locked door, key trembling slightly in his hand. For 5 years, he'd preserved this room exactly as it had been the day of the accident. Thomas's room, frozen in time, like a memorial. His conversation with Catherine echoed in his mind. And if I asked you to stay? The words had escaped before he could stop them, revealing more than he'd intended. With a deep breath, Blake inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft click that seemed to reverberate through the silent hallway. He pushed the door open slowly, dust particles dancing in the beam of light from the corridor. Everything remained as he'd left it. The blue walls covered with solar system decals, the bookshelf filled with adventure stories, the bed with its rumpled spaceship comforter that Mrs. Winters had been instructed never to touch. On the bedside table, a framed photo of Thomas with Blake and his wife Sarah all smiling on a beach vacation, their last together. Blake stepped inside, overwhelmed by memories. He picked up a toy car from the collection displayed on a shelf, identical to the one the twins had sold him. Thomas had loved cars too. Mr. Blake? He turned sharply. Lucas stood in the doorway, eyes wide with curiosity and uncertainty. "You shouldn't be here," Blake said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," Lucas whispered. "I heard the door open." His gaze traveled around the room, understanding dawning on his young face. "This was your son's room." Blake nodded, unable to speak. "What was his name?" "Thomas." "Was he our age?" "He would be now. He was 5 when—" Blake couldn't finish. Lucas entered cautiously, approaching the photo on the nightstand. "You all look happy." "We were." Lucas studied the picture, then looked up at Blake. "My mom says Dad watches over us from heaven. Maybe Thomas watches over you too." The simple statement, delivered with a child's certainty, cracked something inside. Blake. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, emotions he'd suppressed for years finally breaking through. "I miss him," Blake admitted, the words barely audible. "Every day." "We miss our dad too," Lucas said, sitting beside him. "Mom says it's okay to be sad sometimes, but we shouldn't forget to be happy too." From the doorway came a small gasp. Zach stood there, still pale from his illness but eyes wide at the forbidden room. Behind him, Catherine appeared, her expression softening as she took in the scene. "Boys, come away," she said gently. "This is private." "It's all right," Blake found himself saying. "They can come in." Zach approached cautiously, examining the room with quiet reverence. "Cool space lamp," he observed, pointing to a rocket-shaped nightlight. Thomas was afraid of the dark, Blake explained, surprising himself with how easily the words came now. "We bought this on his 5th birthday." Catherine remained in the doorway, watching as Blake began showing the twins Thomas's favorite, books and toys. Each object came with a story, memories Blake had locked away now flowing freely. The pain was still there, but somehow sharing it made it bearable. Later, after the twins had gone to bed, Catherine found Blake still in Thomas's room, sitting quietly. "I'm sorry they intruded," she said. "They're naturally curious." "Don't be," Blake replied. It was time to open this door. Catherine leaned against the doorframe. "It's a beautiful room. He must have been a wonderful little boy." "He was." Blake looked up at her. "The accident was my fault. I was driving. A truck ran a red light. I survived. They didn't." Catherine crossed the room and sat beside him. "That's why you've isolated yourself all these years. You're punishing yourself." The simple truth of her assessment left him speechless. "Survivor's guilt is a terrible burden," she continued softly. "But living half a life doesn't honor their memory." Blake looked into her compassionate eyes and felt, for the first time in years, like someone truly saw him. Not the successful CEO, but the broken man beneath the perfect facade. "I don't know how to stop," he confessed. Catherine placed her hand over his. "Maybe you've already started." Spring arrived, bringing transformation to both the estate grounds and its inhabitants. The gardens Blake had maintained, but rarely enjoyed, now became a sanctuary where the twins explored daily. Catherine's health improved steadily, her face regaining its natural glow, her strength returning with each passing week. Most remarkably transformed, however, was Blake himself. The change happened gradually, so subtly that an outsider might not notice. But Catherine observed how his rigid posture softened when the boys entered a room, how genuine smiles occasionally replaced his customary stern expression. One sunny Saturday, Blake surprised everyone by canceling his usual weekend work session and suggesting they all visit the city's Natural History Museum. "Really?" Zach exclaimed, nearly dropping his cereal spoon. "The dinosaur exhibit just opened," Blake said casually, as if family outings were commonplace for him. "Unless you'd prefer something else." "Dinosaurs are perfect," Lucas confirmed enthusiastically. Catherine watched this exchange with quiet amazement. "Are you sure, Blake? You usually work Saturdays." Work can wait, he replied, their eyes meeting briefly in shared understanding of how significant this statement was for a man who had built his life around his company. The museum trip marked a turning point. For the first time, they ventured out together beyond medical appointments, a visible unit that drew curious glances from museum staff who recognized the famous CEO, accompanied by a woman and identical boys. Blake, normally hyper-aware of public perception, seemed indifferent to the attention. "Look, Mr. Blake," Zach called, pointing excitedly at a massive T-Rex skeleton. "This one's even bigger than the model in your library." Blake found himself caught up in their enthusiasm, answering endless questions about prehistoric creatures with information gleaned from books he'd read to Thomas years ago. When Lucas took his hand to drag him toward the next exhibit, Blake didn't pull away, an instinctive acceptance of physical connection that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Watching from a bench while the three examined a fossil display, Catherine felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Blake had changed from intimidating benefactor to something else entirely, a man who genuinely cared for her sons, who had opened himself to connection despite his painful past. The most troubling realization wasn't that she was grateful, but that she was growing attached in ways that went beyond gratitude. "Ice cream?" Blake suggested as they exited the museum, noticing a vendor across the street. The twins didn't need to be asked twice. As they raced ahead, Catherine and Blake followed at a slower pace. "Thank you for today," she said. "I haven't seen them this excited in a long time." "I enjoyed it too," Blake admitted. "More than I expected." "You're good with them," Catherine observed. "Patient. Not many men would be." Blake watched the twins comparing ice cream flavors at the counter. "They make it easy. They're remarkable children." "You've given them something invaluable," Catherine said softly. "Stability, security, a male presence they can trust." Blake turned to her, his expression serious. "Catherine, about what you said last week. Looking for an apartment." "Blake," she interrupted gently. "We can't stay in your world forever. You've already done more than anyone could expect. What if I want you to stay?" The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully address. Before Catherine could respond, the twins returned, proudly displaying elaborate ice cream concoctions. "Mr. Blake, can we go to the park next weekend?" Lucas asked eagerly. "Perhaps," Blake replied, glancing at Catherine. "We'll see." That evening, as the twins recounted their museum adventures to Mrs. Winters, Blake found Catherine in Thomas's room. She stood by the bookshelf, examining a model airplane hanging from the ceiling. "I used to imagine leaving was the right thing," she said without turning. "For you, for us. A clean break before everyone gets too attached." She finally faced him. "But I'm beginning to think that might no longer be possible." Blake stepped into the room, the space no longer filled with just pain and memory, but something new. Possibility. "Then don't leave," he said simply. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Catherine prepared breakfast, moving with an ease that reflected her improving health. The aroma of coffee and pancakes filled the air, creating a sense of domestic tranquility that had once been unimaginable in Blake's austere home. "Need help?" Blake asked, entering the kitchen in casual weekend attire rather than his usual business suit. Catherine smiled. "You can set the table. The boys should be down any minute." They worked together in comfortable silence, the routine now familiar after 2 months of cohabitation. When Blake's hand accidentally brushed against hers while reaching for plates, neither pulled away immediately, a subtle acknowledgement of the growing connection between them. "Dr. Levine says I can reduce my treatments to once weekly," Catherine mentioned, flipping a pancake. "My kidney function has stabilized beyond their expectations." Blake paused. "That's wonderful news." "It is," she agreed, though her tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "It also means I need to think seriously about work. I can't be financially dependent forever." Before Blake could respond, thundering footsteps announced the twins' arrival. They burst into the kitchen already dressed for their Saturday baseball practice, another new addition to the household routine. "Mom, Mr. Blake," Zach exclaimed. "Coach said I might pitch today." "And I'm playing first base," Lucas added proudly. Breakfast. Conversation centered on baseball strategy and team standings. The earlier tension momentarily set aside. Blake, who had never attended a sporting event that wasn't a corporate sponsorship opportunity, found himself genuinely invested in the Twins' athletic progress. At the local field, Blake and Catherine sat together on aluminum bleachers, watching the boys warm up with their teammates. Several parents nodded respectfully toward Blake, though none approached. His reputation for privacy preceded him. "They've grown," Catherine observed. "Their clothes from February barely fit now." "Children do that," Blake replied with a small smile. "Grow when you least expect it." Catherine turned to study his profile. "Not just physically, they're happier, more confident. That's because of you, Blake." He shook his head. "They're resilient, and they have you. But now they have you too," she said softly. "They talk about you constantly." Mr. Blake showed us how to use the telescope. Mr. Blake explained how airplanes fly. Mr. Blake promised to teach us chess openings. Blake watched as Zach took position on the pitcher's mound, his small face concentrated with determination. "I never expected this," Blake admitted. "Any of it." "Neither did I," Catherine replied. "When you appeared at our door that day, I thought you were just a wealthy man assuaging his conscience with charity. And now? Now I know better." Their eyes met, communicating more than words could express. The moment was interrupted by cheers as Zach struck out his first batter. Blake found himself on his feet, applauding more enthusiastically than he had for any business achievement. Later that evening, after the Twins had gone to bed, Blake and Catherine sat on the terrace, the spring air mild and fragrant with blooming flowers. Between them rested the real estate listings Catherine had been discreetly researching. "These are all too far from your treatments," Blake observed, examining the circled apartments. "They're what I can afford," Catherine replied pragmatically. "I've applied for administrative positions that would accommodate my medical schedule." Blake set the papers aside. "There's another option." "Blake, hear me out," he interrupted, gently. "This house has 7 bedrooms. The boys are thriving in their school. Your medical team is nearby." He paused, gathering courage. "Stay. Not as temporary guests, but permanently." Catherine looked away, her profile gilded by moonlight. "People would talk. They'd say I manipulated you, that the boys and I are taking advantage." "Let them talk," Blake said with sudden fierceness. "I've spent 5 years making decisions based on what others might think, on maintaining perfect control. I'm tired of it." "What exactly are you proposing?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm proposing we stop pretending this is temporary, that we acknowledge whatever this is between us deserves a chance." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for immediate answers. Just don't leave yet." Catherine's eyes glistened in the dim light. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, but of hoping again, of letting the boys hope." "I'm afraid too," Blake confessed. "But for the first time in years, I'm more afraid of losing something than of having it." As the night deepened around them, neither moved to break the connection of their intertwined hands, a silent agreement to face their fears together. Summer arrived in full splendor, transforming the estate's formal gardens into a playground, where the twins spent endless hours exploring, building forts, and occasionally helping the amused groundskeeper with simple tasks. The mansion itself had undergone a more subtle transformation. Children's artwork now adorned the refrigerator, colorful sneakers cluttered the entryway, and laughter echoed through previously silent corridors. 3 months had passed since Blake's proposition on the terrace. Catherine had neither accepted nor rejected his offer of permanence, but they had fallen into a comfortable rhythm that felt increasingly like family life. "Mom, Mr. Blake, look what we found," Lucas called one Saturday morning, bursting into the breakfast room where Blake and Catherine were quietly enjoying coffee. Both boys appeared muddy and triumphant, holding a small turtle between them. "He was by the pond," Zach explained excitedly. "Can we keep him, please?" Blake glanced at Catherine, who raised an eyebrow in silent communication. Their newfound ability to converse without words, one of many developments in their evolving relationship. "A turtle requires proper care," Blake replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should research what he needs first." "We could build him a habitat," Lucas suggested. "Mr. Blake, you said you had building supplies in the garage, right?" "I did," Blake confirmed, surprising himself with how naturally he now included the boys in his plans and possessions. Catherine watched this exchange with a gentle smile. "Wash up first, then we can look up turtle care online." The boys dashed off, leaving muddy footprints that would have once horrified Blake but now barely registered. "You realize this means we'll be constructing a turtle paradise this afternoon," Catherine said with amusement. "I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts," Blake replied dryly. "I suspect I can handle turtle architecture." Their laughter mingled easily, a sound that had become increasingly common. The day unfolded in domestic harmony, researching turtle habitats online, gathering supplies, and working together in the garden to create a suitable home for the reptilian visitor. Blake, who once delegated every task to staff, found himself kneeling in dirt, patiently explaining to the twins how to create proper drainage for their habitat. Mrs. Winters, bringing lemonade to the garden, paused to observe her employer, the formidable CEO now sporting dirt-smudged khakis and a relaxed smile as he worked alongside the boys. The housekeeper exchanged a knowing glance with Catherine, both women silently acknowledging the transformation. That evening, after tucking the twins into bed, another ritual Blake had gradually joined. He and Catherine settled in the library, with glasses of wine. "The turtle habitat is quite impressive," Catherine commented, curling comfortably into a corner of the sofa. "You've missed your calling as an environmental engineer." Blake smiled, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen in their early days. "The board would be shocked to see me covered in mud and pond water." "Your company has been patient with your reduced schedule," Catherine observed. "The benefits of being the founder," Blake replied, "though my executive team has handled things admirably in my partial absence." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock and the distant sounds of the house settling. "I received a job offer today," Catherine said finally. "Administrative director at a nonprofit. The salary is modest but adequate, and they're willing to accommodate my treatment schedule." Blake set down his wine glass carefully. "Congratulations," he said, his tone measured. "When would you start?" "I haven't accepted yet," Catherine replied, watching his expression. "It would mean decisions about other matters." The unspoken question hung between them. Would accepting the job mean leaving the estate, ending this careful dance they'd been performing? "Blake," Catherine continued softly, "we've lived in this beautiful limbo for months now. The boys consider this home. They consider you." She hesitated. "Family?" Blake supplied, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability rarely revealed. Catherine nodded. "They've grown to love you. And I—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Blake moved closer on the sofa, taking her hand. "And you?" Catherine met his gaze directly. "I've grown to love the man behind the fortress, the man who builds turtle habitats and cheers at Little League games, the man who opened locked doors." Blake's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted. "After losing Sarah and Thomas, I convinced myself it was safer to feel nothing." "And now?" Catherine prompted gently. "Now I find myself terrified by how much I have to lose," Blake confessed. "How essential you and the boys have become to my life." Catherine leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "Then ask us to stay," she whispered. "Not as guests or charity cases. Ask us properly." Blake sat in his office the following morning, staring at the small velvet box on his desk. The antique ring inside, his grandmother's, had been in a safe deposit box for years. He'd retrieved it yesterday after his conversation with Catherine, his mind racing with possibilities. "Ask us properly," she had said. The words echoed in his mind, both thrilling and terrifying. Blake Harrison, who made multi-million-dollar decisions daily without hesitation, found himself paralyzed by uncertainty. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Blake." Lucas peered around the door. "Mom said to tell you lunch is ready." "I'll be right there," Blake replied, quickly slipping the ring box into his desk drawer. Lucas lingered. "Are you okay? You look worried." Blake managed a smile. "Just thinking about some important decisions." "About us staying?" Lucas asked with startling directness. "Zach and I want to stay. Forever." Blake's breath caught. "You do?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "Mom's happier here, and you're happier with us, we can tell." "You're very perceptive," Blake observed. The boy shrugged. "Twins notice things." He hesitated, then added, "Mom loves you, you know. She smiles different when you're around." Before Blake could respond, Lucas disappeared down the hallway, leaving him stunned by the simple wisdom of a 10-year-old. At lunch, Blake found himself studying Catherine across the table as she laughed at something Zach said. She caught his gaze and smiled, that special smile Lucas had mentioned, sending warmth spreading through his chest. "I thought we might visit the lake this afternoon," Blake suggested as they finished eating. "The weather's perfect for it." The twins cheered their approval. Blake's estate included a small private lake, complete with a boathouse and dock, which had become a favorite spot during the summer heat. Hours later, as the sun began its descent, Catherine and Blake sat on the dock watching the twins splash in the shallows. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the boys' laughter and the occasional call of birds. "I spoke with the nonprofit director this morning," Catherine said finally. "I asked for a few more days to consider their offer." Blake nodded, his fingers unconsciously touching the ring box in his pocket. "What's holding you back?" Catherine turned to face him fully. "You know exactly what's holding me back, Blake. The same thing that's had you distracted all day." Her expression softened. "Whatever you're wrestling with, just say it." Blake took a deep breath. "When I bought that toy car from the boys, I never imagined where it would lead. I was empty, functioning but not living." He gazed out at the twins. "Then suddenly my house was full of noise and chaos and life again." "It wasn't just charity, was it?" Catherine asked quietly. "Even at the beginning." Blake shook his head. "I told myself it was, that I was just helping because I could. But from that first day, seeing those twin boys trying so desperately to save their mother." He met her eyes. "They reminded me of Thomas, but they also reminded me of what it meant to care deeply about something beyond myself." Catherine reached for his hand. "And now? Now I can't imagine this house without you in it, without the boys, running through the halls without your laugh in the kitchen, without—" He squeezed her hand. "Without the family we've somehow become." The twins' splashing grew more distant as they chased each other along the shoreline, giving the adults a moment of privacy. "I used to think I didn't deserve happiness," Blake continued. "That surviving when Sarah and Thomas didn't was some cosmic punishment. And now?" Catherine prompted again. "Now I think maybe they would want this for me. For us." Blake reached into his pocket and withdrew the ring box. "I've been carrying this around all day, trying to find the perfect moment, the perfect words." Catherine's eyes widened as he opened the box, revealing a vintage emerald surrounded by diamonds. "I'm not offering security or stability or financial support," Blake said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I'm offering partnership, family, a life together that honors both our pasts, but isn't defined by them." He took her hand. "Catherine Wilson, will you and your remarkable sons make this house a home permanently? Will you marry me?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. For a moment that stretched eternally, she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, we'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you." Blake slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her close. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the promise of shared futures and healing hearts. They broke apart at the sound of approaching footsteps. The twins ran toward them, dripping wet and curious. "What's happening?" Zach asked, noticing his mother's tears and Blake's uncharacteristically emotional expression. Catherine extended her hand, showing them the ring. "Mr. Blake has asked us to stay, permanently, as a family." The boys stared at the ring, then at the adults, processing this information. "Does that mean you're getting married?" Lucas asked cautiously. Blake nodded. "If that's all right with you?" "Both." The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, then broke into identical grins. "Does this mean we can call you Dad?" Zach asked boldly. The question hit Blake with unexpected force. He had been prepared for hesitation, for a gradual transition. Instead, these remarkable boys offered immediate acceptance, a gift he never thought he'd receive again. "I would be honored," Blake said, his voice rough with emotion. "But only when you're ready." The twins launched themselves forward, wrapping their arms around both adults in an enthusiastic group hug that nearly toppled everyone into the lake. Laughter and tears mingled as the newly defined family held each other close, the setting sun casting them in golden light. Later that night, as the twins slept and Catherine admired her ring in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window, Blake found himself thinking of Thomas. For the first time, the memory brought bittersweet joy rather than crushing pain, the sense that his son would approve of the family his father had found. In his pocket, Blake still carried the twins' toy car, now a talisman of unexpected beginnings, rather than painful endings. Blake Harrison, once known only for his business acumen and reclusive nature, now found himself the subject of different kinds of whispers as he, Catherine, and the twins entered the charity gala. 6 months had passed since his proposal by the lake. The announcement of their engagement had created ripples throughout Boston's elite circles. "Blake," called Richard Thornton, chairman of Blake's board. "We were beginning to think you'd become entirely domestic these days." Blake guided Catherine forward, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Richard, I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Catherine Wilson." Catherine, elegant in a midnight blue gown that complemented the emerald on her finger, extended her hand with quiet confidence. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thornton. Blake speaks highly of your business partnership." Richard's expression betrayed momentary surprise before he recovered his polished charm. "The pleasure is mine. Blake has been different these past months, happier. Now I understand why." As they moved through the crowded ballroom, Blake introduced Catherine to colleagues and business associates. Some responded with genuine warmth, others with barely concealed curiosity about the woman who had captured the heart of Boston's most eligible widower. "They're wondering what my angle is," Catherine murmured as they stepped onto the dance floor. "The single mother who somehow ensnared the billionaire." Blake drew her closer, moving smoothly to the orchestra's waltz. "Let them wonder. We know the truth." Catherine smiled up at him. "Which is that I'm the fortunate one," Blake replied, his voice low and sincere, "that somehow I was given a second chance at happiness I never thought I deserved." Later that evening, as they drove home, Catherine rested her head against Blake's shoulder. "The boys will want a full report. Zach was convinced you'd be eating from golden plates." Blake chuckled. "Wait until they hear about the chocolate fountain." They found Mrs. Winters in the living room reading to the twins who had stubbornly refused to sleep until their mother and Blake returned. "Mom, Dad," Zach exclaimed, the term Dad now comfortably established in their daily lexicon. "How was the fancy party?" Blake still felt a surge of emotion each time the boys called him Dad, a title he thought he'd never hear again. "Less exciting than you'd imagine," he replied, loosening his tie. Mostly grown-ups talking about boring things. Did you dance? Lucas asked, scrambling to make room on the sofa for them. Catherine kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. We did. Your future dad is surprisingly good at it. The twins looked impressed. Can you teach us? Lucas asked. For when we go to fancy parties too? Of course, Blake promised, settling beside them, though those might be a few years away yet. Mrs. Winters excused herself, smiling at the family tableau, so different from the solitary evenings that had once defined this household. I got an A on my science project, Zach announced proudly. Mrs. Peterson said my ecosystem model was exceptional, and I got picked for the school play, Lucas added, not to be outdone. Catherine and Blake exchanged glances of parental pride. These ordinary achievements, homework, school activities, small triumphs, and occasional failures, had become the precious fabric of their shared life. Later, after the twins had finally been persuaded to bed, Blake and Catherine stood in the doorway of Thomas's room, now a memorial space where photographs of both their past and present families shared space. Blake had suggested converting it to a proper bedroom for one of the twins, but Catherine had insisted otherwise. He's part of our family story too, she'd said. We don't erase the past. We build on it. Now, as wedding plans progressed and their lives intertwined more completely, Blake realized how right she had been. The room had transformed from a shrine to grief into a bridge between past and future, much like Blake himself. 3 weeks until the wedding, Catherine said softly, leaning against him. Having second thoughts? Blake pulled her close. Only about letting the twins be in charge of the rings. I'm envisioning a dramatic chase scene mid-ceremony, Catherine laughed. They promised to be on their best behavior, and Mrs. Winters threatened to withhold dessert for a month if they misbehave. Powerful incentive, Blake agreed, turning off the light as they left the room. Though I wouldn't care if the entire ceremony descended into chaos. As long as at the end of it you're my wife and we're officially a family. Catherine kissed him softly. We already are, Blake. The wedding just makes it official. The garden radiated with springtime glory. Roses climbed trellises, cherry blossoms carpeted pathways, and sunlight dappled the assembled guests. 1 year to the day since Blake's proposal, family and close friends gathered to witness not a wedding, but a renewal of vows. Catherine, radiant in ivory lace, stood opposite Blake beneath an arch of flowers. Between them stood Zach and Lucas, handsome in matching suits, eyes bright with joy as they held the velvet cushions bearing rings. 1 year ago, the officiant began. These 4 souls officially became a family. Today they celebrate that journey and renew their promises. Blake gazed at Catherine, still amazed by the miracle of her presence in his life. When I met 2 determined boys selling a toy car, I never imagined they would lead me back to life, he said, voice steady with certainty. You and the boys, healed wounds I thought permanent. You turned my house back into a home. Catherine squeezed his hands. You saved us in every way a family can be saved. But more importantly, you loved us not out of obligation but with your whole heart. The twins presented the rings with perfect solemnity. As Blake slipped the band onto Catherine's finger, he noted the engraving inside. Second chances. Life had come full circle. What began with a small red toy car had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, proof that even the most wounded hearts could find healing through love's unexpected pathways.
The grand ballroom of the Westfield Hotel sparkled with tiny lights that reflected off the polished dance floor like stars. Fathers in suits twirled daughters in frilly dresses to the orchestra's gentle waltz. Robert Anderson stood at the edge of the charity event, scotch in hand, surveying the scene with detached interest. As CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, his presence was expected at these fundraisers, though children's causes had never been his priority. Mr. Anderson, could I have a word? A colleague approached, and Robert nodded, grateful for the distraction from the sentimental display before him. As they discussed quarterly projections, Robert felt a small tug on his jacket. Turning, he found himself looking down at a little girl with chestnut hair and familiar hazel eyes that stopped his breath. Her pale blue dress matched the ribbon in her hair, and she stood with a confidence that belied her small stature. "Excuse me," she said clearly, extending her hand formally. "Would you dance with me?" Robert stared, momentarily speechless. Something about her eyes, the shape, the color, struck him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he finally managed. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else. Your father must be around here somewhere." The little girl's expression didn't waver. "No mistake. You're Robert Anderson, CEO of Pinnacle Technologies." She paused, then delivered the words that would shatter his carefully constructed world. "And you're my father." The room seemed to tilt. Conversations faded to a distant hum as Robert stared at the child claiming to be his daughter. A daughter he never knew existed. "That's not possible," he whispered, though even as the words left his mouth he recognized Sarah's features in the girl's face. Sarah, whom he'd left 8 years ago. "My name is Emma Grace Anderson," she continued, undeterred. "I'm 7 years old. My birthday is March 18th. My mom is Sarah Wilson. You left when she was pregnant with me." Robert's colleague discreetly stepped away, leaving him alone with this child who spoke with such startling directness. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the music. "Google," Emma replied simply. "Plus, your picture was in Mum's old box. The one she thinks I don't know about." She glanced at the dance floor. "So will you dance with me? Just one dance, that's all I came for." Robert felt dozens of eyes on them now, including those of the event photographer. Tomorrow's headline flashed in his mind. "Tech CEO refuses dance with child at charity ball." "Just one dance," he agreed, setting down his glass with a shaking hand. As they stepped onto the floor, Emma placed her small hand in his. "I've been practicing," she informed him seriously. "Michael taught me." "Michael?" "Mum's friend. He takes me to father-daughter things sometimes." Robert felt an irrational surge of jealousy as Emma guided him through the basic waltz steps. She counted under her breath, concentrating with an intensity that reminded him painfully of himself. "Does your mother know you're here?" he asked suddenly. Emma's slight hesitation told him everything. "She thinks I'm at a sleepover with Madison." "Emma, you can't just—" "I had to meet you," she interrupted, "just once." As the music swelled around them, Robert caught sight of his reflection in the ballroom's mirrored wall. A successful man dancing with a little girl who had his eyes and Sarah's determined chin. A daughter he hadn't known existed until 5 minutes ago. A daughter who had sought him out. "Why now?" he asked. "After 7 years?" Emma looked up at him, suddenly vulnerable despite her composure. "Because I needed to know if you were real." Sarah Wilson paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear, fighting to keep panic from her voice. "Madison's mother swears Emma never arrived for the sleepover. She thought we had cancelled." Her free hand clutched Emma's teddy bear, the one constant in her daughter's life. "I'm driving around the neighborhood again," Michael Thompson replied, his deep voice steady despite the concern evident in it. "Did you check her search history on the iPad?" Sarah froze. "Hold on!" She rushed to Emma's room, swiping open the tablet. The browser history had been cleared, unusual for her 7-year-old. But the photo gallery revealed screenshots of an event page. "Annual Children's Hospital Charity Ball at the Westfield Hotel." "Oh, God," Sarah whispered. "Michael, I know where she is." Across town, the orchestra finished its waltz. Robert guided Emma to the edge of the dance floor, his mind racing. The child, his child, looked up at him with an evaluating gaze that seemed impossible for someone so young. "You're taller than in the pictures," Emma remarked, "and you have more grey hair now." Robert's hand unconsciously touched his temple. 7 years will do that. 8, Emma corrected. You left 8 years ago, before I was born. A waiter passed with sparkling cider, and Emma deftly snagged 2 glasses, offering one to Robert with practiced politeness that spoke of her mother's careful upbringing. You shouldn't be here alone, Robert said, accepting the glass automatically. Does anyone know where you are? I took an Uber using Mom's account, Emma explained. The driver thought I was meeting my dad here. Her smile held a hint of mischief. Which was true. Robert felt dizzy at her resourcefulness and the recklessness of her journey. Emma, I need to call your mother. Not yet, she pleaded. I have questions first. Questions I may not have answers to. Emma studied him, head tilted. Why did you leave Mom when she told you about me? The directness of the question hit like a physical blow. Robert glanced around, acutely aware they were in public. That's uncomplicated, Emma. I'm smart for my age. Everyone says so. I'm sure you are, but this isn't the place. Did you not want me? Her voice remained steady, but her small fingers tightened around the glass. Robert crouched to her level, surprising himself with the instinctive movement. Emma, I didn't know about you. Confusion crossed her face. But Mom said she told you she was pregnant and then you left. The memories flooded back, that final explosive argument in their apartment. Sarah tearfully announcing her pregnancy amidst the wreckage of their relationship. Him walking out, believing it a desperate attempt to salvage what was already broken. I didn't believe her, he admitted, the truth tasting bitter. We were already separating, I thought. He trailed off, realizing how hollow any explanation would sound. Emma digested this. So you didn't leave because of me? You just didn't think I was real? Something like that, Robert answered, the inadequacy of his response hanging between them. Emma's expression brightened slightly. That's better than you leaving because you didn't want me. Before Robert could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught his attention. Sarah stood in the doorway, Michael beside her, both scanning the crowd frantically. Even from a distance, Robert recognized the mixture of fear and fury on his ex-wife's face. That's Mom, Emma whispered, suddenly looking her age, a child caught in wrongdoing. She's going to be so mad. With good reason, Robert replied, standing and instinctively placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. The gesture surprised them both. Sarah spotted them, her face paling. 8 years dissolved in an instant as their eyes locked across the crowded room. You should go to her, Robert said quietly. This isn't how any of this should have happened. Emma looked up at him, suddenly urgent. Will I see you again? Before he could answer, Sarah was pushing through the crowd toward them, her expression a storm of emotions that Robert remembered all too well. I don't know, he answered honestly, but thank you for the dance, Emma. What were you thinking? Sarah's voice cracked with the strain of maintaining composure in the hotel corridor. Do you understand how dangerous that was? Taking an Uber alone, disappearing without telling anyone? Emma stood with her head bowed, but her posture remained unbent. I just wanted to meet him. You could have been... Sarah broke off, unable to voice the horrors her mind had conjured during the frantic search. She crouched, gripping Emma's shoulders. Promise me, you will never do anything like this again. I promise, Emma whispered, tears finally welling. I'm sorry I scared you. Michael hung back, giving them space while keeping a watchful eye on the ballroom entrance where Robert Anderson remained, observing the family reunion from a distance. Sarah hugged Emma tightly, then stood. Wait here with Michael. I need a word with your father. As Sarah approached, Robert straightened his tie in an unconscious gesture of armor-donning. 8 years had been kind to her, he noted. The college girlfriend who became his wife now moved with a confident grace that spoke of hard-won strength. Sarah, he greeted, his voice carefully neutral. How dare you? she hissed, stopping just short of him. "How dare you dance with her, speak with her, without calling me immediately?" "She only approached me 15 minutes ago," Robert defended. "I was trying to process the fact that I apparently have a 7-year-old daughter I never knew existed." Sarah's eyes flashed dangerously. "Don't you dare pretend you didn't know. I told you I was pregnant that night. And I didn't believe you," he countered. "We were already over, Sarah. I thought it was a last-ditch effort to— To what? Trap the mighty Robert Anderson?" Bitter laughter escaped her. "I tried to call you for weeks afterward. Your number was changed. Your assistant blocked me. Your lawyer delivered divorce papers that made no mention of a child." Robert's certainty faltered. "I instructed them to handle everything. I was opening the Singapore office." "Always the convenient business trip." Sarah's voice dripped with old pain. "She has your eyes, Robert, and your birthmark on her shoulder. A simple DNA test would have confirmed everything." The weight of 8 years of absence pressed on him. "I didn't know," he repeated, though the excuse sounded hollow even to himself. "Well, now you do," Sarah replied. "So what happens next is your choice. You can disappear again, you're good at that, or, he prompted when she didn't continue. Sarah looked back at Emma, who was showing Michael something on her small, beaded purse, her animated gestures a mirror of Robert's own mannerisms during business presentations. "Or you can be her father," Sarah finished quietly. "But understand this, if you choose to be in her life, it's not casual. It's not when it's convenient between board meetings. It's ballet recitals and science fairs, and being there when she has nightmares." Robert felt the foundations of his carefully structured life shifting. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," Sarah replied with practiced indifference. "We've managed 7 years without you. We'll manage more." She turned to leave, then paused. "She researched you for months, you know. Saved her allowance to buy the ticket to this event. Practiced dancing with Michael for weeks." Her voice softened fractionally. "Whatever you decide, remember she's the one who found you, not the other way around." As Sarah walked back toward Emma and Michael, Robert called after her. "How do I contact you if I—" "Emma left something for you," Sarah replied without turning. "Check your pocket." Confused, Robert reached into his jacket pocket and found a folded paper star. Opening it carefully revealed a phone number written in careful child's handwriting, and beneath it, "This is Mom's number. Call if you want to be my dad. Emma G. Anderson, your daughter." Robert sat in his empty penthouse, the paper star unfolded before him on the glass coffee table. 3 days had passed since the charity ball. 3 days of distracted meetings and sleepless nights. His executive assistant had noticed, diplomatically rearranging his schedule to accommodate his unusual distraction. The DNA test results lay beside the star, rushed through a private lab at considerable expense. 99.99998% probability of paternity. The clinical confirmation of what Emma's hazel eyes had already told him. He had a daughter. His phone chimed with Michael Thompson's 3rd call of the day. Robert had been avoiding his VP of operations and apparent stand-in father figure to his daughter. The thought still jolted him, his daughter, his friend, playing father to his child. Finally he answered. "Michael." "About time," came the familiar voice. "We need to talk, Rob." "About Emma." "Yes, about Emma. And Sarah. And the fact that you've been walking around the office like a ghost for 3 days." Robert sighed. "Come over tonight. Bring whatever files need my attention." "I'll bring scotch instead," Michael replied. "Files can wait." Hours later, 2 tumblers of Macallan 25 sat between them as Michael filled the silences Robert left. "She's extraordinary, Rob. Brilliant, stubborn, observant, reads at a high school level already, plays chess like a demon," pride colored Michael's voice. "She's got your analytical mind and Sarah's compassion." Robert swirled his untouched scotch. "How long have you been in their lives?" Since the beginning, Michael admitted. I ran into Sarah at the hospital when Emma was born, premature but fighting, just like her mother. He leaned forward. Sarah never asked for anything, Rob. Not money, not support. She finished nursing school with a newborn, worked double shifts. I just helped where I could. While working for me, Robert observed, an edge in his voice. Don't, Michael warned. Don't make this about loyalty to you. You were gone. They needed someone. Robert conceded with a nod. Does Emma have everything she needs? Michael's hesitation was brief but noticeable. Materially, Sarah provides well enough. Emotionally, she's been asking about you more this past year. Hence the mission to find you. There's something you're not telling me. Michael set down his glass. That's Sarah's place, not mine. A knock at the door interrupted them. Robert opened it to find Sarah, arms crossed, expression guarded. Michael called me, she explained, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. She stopped short at the sight of the DNA results. Was that necessary? For me, yes, Robert replied. Come in, Sarah. She remained standing, declining his gesture toward the sofa. Emma's been asking if you'll call. I've been processing, he said, aware of how corporate the response sounded. Well, process faster, Sarah snapped. She's 7. She thinks your silence means she did something wrong by finding you. Guilt surged through him. That's not what you intended, Sarah finished. Intentions don't matter much to children, Robert. Actions do. Michael stood, gathering his coat. I should go. Stay, Sarah and Robert said simultaneously, then exchanged surprised glances. Robert needs to hear everything, Sarah continued, and I'd rather say it once. The gravity in her tone chilled him. What is it? What's wrong with Emma? Sarah sank onto the edge of the sofa. Emma has a rare blood disorder, diamond black fan anemia. Her bone marrow doesn't produce enough red blood cells. The medical terminology hit Robert like physical blows. Is it treatable? She has monthly transfusions, takes medications daily, but her body is becoming resistant. Sarah's clinical tone couldn't hide her fear. She needs a bone marrow transplant. I'm not a match, neither is Michael. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. That's why she sought me out now. Sarah's eyes flashed. No, Emma has no idea I'm here tonight. She found you because she's wanted to know her father her entire life, her voice caught. But yes, we need to test if you're a match. It could save her life. Robert stared at the paper star, its edges worn from his handling. When? The specialist can see you tomorrow, Michael interjected. I've already cleared your schedule. Robert looked between them, his ex-wife and his friend, united in their concern for a child he'd only just discovered. A child who needed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. I'll be there, he promised, the words feeling inadequate against the weight of 7 missed years and an uncertain future. The children's ward bustled with activity as Robert followed Sarah through corridors decorated with bright murals and twinkling lights. Every step felt surreal, this hidden parallel universe of childhood illness existing alongside his world of boardrooms and balance sheets. Emma doesn't know why you're here, Sarah reminded him, stopping outside a room with construction paper stars on the door. She thinks you're just visiting. And if I'm a match? Robert asked quietly. Sarah's expression softened marginally. Then we'll explain everything together. Inside, Emma sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, a chessboard before her, Michael seated opposite. Her face lit up when she spotted Robert, though she quickly composed herself into studied casualness. You came, she observed, moving a knight with deliberate precision. Check, Michael. Michael groaned theatrically. She's ruthless, Rob. No mercy for an old man. Robert approached cautiously, noting the IV line disappearing beneath Emma's Wonder Woman pajama sleeve. I got your message. Very professional, The star was a nice touch. Origami, Emma explained. I'm learning from YouTube. I can make cranes and frogs too. She studied him openly. You look tired. Emma, Sarah admonished gently. It's fine, Robert assured her. I am tired. Work has been busy. Emma nodded knowingly. Michael says you run a very important company that makes computers talk to each other. That's surprisingly accurate, Robert acknowledged, with a glance at Michael, who shrugged innocently. A nurse appeared with a cheerful smile. Mr. Anderson, we're ready for you now. Emma's gaze sharpened. Ready for what? Sarah stepped forward. Robert just needs some tests, sweetie. Routine checkup. Emma's eyes narrowed suspiciously. In the pediatric oncology ward? Robert felt a surge of respect for her perception. No wonder she'd managed to track him down. I'll be back soon, he promised, following the nurse. An hour later, Robert sat in Dr. Olivia Martinez's office as she explained the bone marrow donation process. The preliminary blood work showed promising compatibility, though final results would take days. If you're a match, Doctor. Martinez explained, the actual donation procedure takes about 2 hours. We use a special needle to withdraw liquid marrow from your pelvic bone. And recovery time? Robert asked, already mentally rearranging his calendar. A week of soreness, perhaps 2 before you feel completely normal. And for Emma, if this works? Doctor, Martinez's expression softened. The transplant is difficult. Recovery takes months, but success rates are good with familial donors. She studied him. You just learned about your daughter, didn't you? Robert nodded, unable to vocalize the complex emotions churning within him. For what it's worth, the doctor offered, Sarah is one of the strongest parents I've ever worked with. Emma is extraordinary. However you proceed from here, they've built something remarkable. When Robert returned to Emma's room, he found her alone, Sarah and Michael having stepped out for coffee. Are you sick too? Emma asked bluntly as he sat beside her bed. No, he answered honestly. Then why are they testing you? Robert considered his options. Emma, what do you know about your condition? She sighed with the exasperation of one who'd explained this many times. My bone marrow is lazy. It doesn't make enough red blood cells, which carry oxygen, so I get tired a lot. Sometimes I need other people's blood. She pointed to the IV. Like today. And has your mom explained about bone marrow transplants? Emma stilled. Those are for when the medicine stops working as well. Her eyes widened. Are you getting tested to see if you can give me your bone marrow? Robert nodded, struck by her quick understanding. Does that mean the medicine is stopping working? Fear crept into her voice for the first time. It means we're exploring all options, Robert answered carefully. Your mom is very thorough. Emma considered this. If you matched, would it hurt you? A little, he admitted, but not for long. Would you do it? Even though you just met me? The question hung between them, simple yet profound. Yes, Robert said, surprised by the immediacy and certainty of his answer. Without hesitation. Emma's small hand reached for his, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you. She paused. Does this mean you're staying? In my life, I mean. Before Robert could answer, Sarah and Michael returned. The moment fractured, Emma's question lingering unanswered, as the adults exchanged meaningful glances over her head. Later, in the hospital corridor, Dr. Martinez approached with preliminary results. We need more tests, but it's looking promising, very promising. When will we know for certain? Sarah asked, hope warring with caution in her voice. By Friday, the doctor assured them. If Mr. Anderson is a match, we can schedule the procedure for next week. As they walked to the parking lot, an uncomfortable silence stretched between them, until Robert finally spoke. I'd like to see her again, before Friday, if that's okay. Sarah studied him, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw made her nod slowly. She has chess club tomorrow after school. 4 o'clock at the community center on Maple Street. I'll be there, Robert promised. As he watched Sarah drive away, Michael clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. I'm not doing it to be right, Robert replied quietly. I'm doing it because she's my daughter. The words felt strange on his tongue, yet undeniably true. The community center hummed with the concentrated silence of children in thought. Robert stood at the back of the room, feeling conspicuously out of place in his business suit among parents in casual attire. Emma sat at a board near the front, her brow furrowed in concentration as she contemplated her next move against a boy nearly twice her size. She's the club champion for her age group, whispered a voice beside him. Robert turned to find Sarah, who'd apparently slipped in after him. Been playing since she was 4. Did you teach her? He asked. Sarah shook her head. Michael. He's played since college. The familiar twinge of jealousy returned. All these milestones, these skills, these aspects of his daughter's personality, shaped by another man while he'd been oblivious, focused on quarterly reports and market expansions. Thank you for letting me come, he said, instead of voicing these thoughts. Sarah's gaze remained on Emma. She asked if you would. That's the only reason. On the board, Emma executed a complex maneuver that left her opponent blinking in surprise. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth, an expression Robert recognized from his own mirror. The test results came in early, Sarah said quietly. Dr. Martinez called an hour ago. Robert's heart stuttered. And? You're a match, a very good one. Relief and something more complicated colored her voice. The procedure is scheduled for Monday if you're still willing. Of course I am, he replied immediately. Sarah finally looked at him directly. This doesn't erase the past 8 years, Robert. I know that. But, she continued, her voice softening fractionally, it does change things. For Emma's sake, we need to establish some kind of relationship. Co-parenting, I suppose. The term felt both foreign and right. I'd like that, Robert said carefully. I know I have a lot to learn. Sarah's laugh held little humor. You have no idea. Across the room, Emma executed a checkmate, her face lighting with contained triumph as she offered her hand to her opponent with practiced sportsmanship. She scanned the room and spotted Robert, her smile widening momentarily before she composed herself again. She's trying so hard to be casual about you being here, Sarah observed. She practiced what she'd say to you all morning. Emma approached them, chess notation book in hand. You came, she said to Robert, echoing her greeting from the hospital. I said I would, he replied simply. Mom says you're a match, Emma continued, her direct gaze challenging him to prevaricate. Yes, he confirmed, glancing at Sarah. Your mother and I were just discussing next steps. Emma nodded seriously. The bone marrow transplant. I've been reading about it. She held up her book. Not in this. This is just chess. I have medical books too. Of course you do, Robert murmured, increasingly awed by this child, his child. Are you scared? Emma asked unexpectedly. The question caught him off guard. About the procedure? About being my dad, she clarified, her voice matter-of-fact despite the weight of her words. Sarah inhaled sharply beside him, but remained silent, allowing him to answer. Yes, Robert admitted, crouching to Emma's level. I am. I've missed 7 years of your life. I don't know your favorite color or book or what makes you laugh. I'm afraid I'll disappoint you. Emma considered this with a seriousness that belied her age. Purple, the phantom toll booth, and Michael's dad jokes even though I pretend they're not funny. She paused. Everyone's afraid of disappointing people they care about. That's normal. Her simple wisdom left him momentarily speechless. I have a recital next Friday, she continued pragmatically. You'll still be recovering, but you could come in a wheelchair if you wanted. Mom says it's important to keep doing normal things during treatment." The casual invitation, her extension of normalcy to include him, felt monumental. "I'd like that very much," he managed. Emma nodded, satisfied. "Good. I play the wizard in our dance. I have a purple cape." She turned as her chess coach called the group back for awards. "I have to go get my trophy." As she walked away, Sarah let out a long breath. She's been planning that conversation for days. "She's remarkable," Robert said, watching Emma accept a small trophy with dignity beyond her years. "Yes, she is," Sarah agreed. "And now you have a chance to know her. Don't waste it, Robert." He turned to face his ex-wife fully. "Sarah, about the past, about leaving, there's something you should know." Sarah's expression closed immediately. "Not now, not here." "It's important," he insisted. "The reason I left—" "Was it because of the call?" she interrupted, her voice barely audible. Robert froze. "You knew about that." "I found out later, much later." Pain flickered across her face. "Michael told me after things got bad with Emma's condition." "I should have told you myself," Robert acknowledged. "I shouldn't have just left." "No," Sarah agreed, "you shouldn't have." She watched as Emma proudly showed her trophy to her coach. "But that's the past. Emma is what matters now." Across the room, their daughter looked back at them. These two adults awkwardly navigating a new reality because of her. She gave them a small, encouraging wave. "She's been waiting for you," Sarah said softly. "Even before she knew she needed your bone marrow, she's been waiting for you her entire life." The weight of those words settled on Robert's shoulders, not as a burden, but as a responsibility he was finally ready to accept. "I'm here now," he promised, "and I'm not going anywhere." The morning of the bone marrow procedure dawned clear and crisp. Robert stood at his penthouse window, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. In 3 hours, doctors would extract the marrow that might save his daughter's life. The thought still felt surreal. His daughter, whom he'd known for less than 2 weeks. His phone chimed with a text from Emma. "Good luck today. Don't be scared. The doctors are really nice." The simple message, sent from Sarah's phone, brought an unexpected lump to his throat. A child comforting an adult, her way of establishing connection on this momentous day. Michael arrived to drive him to the hospital. "Nervous?" he asked, as they navigated morning traffic. "About the procedure?" "No," Robert replied. "About everything after?" "Absolutely." "One day at a time," Michael advised. "That's how Sarah's handled everything since Emma's diagnosis." Robert nodded, then asked the question that had been haunting him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? About Emma? You've known all along." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Sarah made me promise not to. And after what happened with your father, you knew I would have come back if I'd known the truth." "Would you?" Michael challenged. "You were building an empire, Rob. You left Sarah when she needed you most. I wasn't convinced a child would change that." The hospital loomed ahead, ending their conversation as they pulled into the parking structure. Inside, Emma waited in a wheelchair, her small frame dwarfed by hospital equipment. Her face lit up when she spotted Robert, though fatigue shadowed her eyes. "You came," she said, her customary greeting that now carried layers of meaning between them. "Of course," Robert replied, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "I promised." Dr. Martinez approached with warm efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson. We've prepared everything. Emma wanted to see you before you both go in for your procedures." "Can I ask something first?" Emma looked between Robert and Sarah, who stood protectively nearby. "Anything," Sarah assured her. "After this is over, and if it works." Emma hesitated. "Will we be a real family, like with Robert visiting on weekends and stuff?" The question hung in the air, weighted with hope and complexity. Robert met Sarah's gaze over Emma's head, an unspoken conversation passing between them. The past could not be erased, but perhaps the future could be rewritten. Yes, Robert answered firmly. We'll figure it out together. All of us. Sarah's small nod confirmed the promise. Michael stepped back slightly, his role in this new configuration uncertain but his support unwavering. Emma smiled, satisfied. Good. Because I already told Madison you're coming to Career Day next month. Robert laughed, surprised. Did you now? Tech CEOs are very impressive, Emma informed him solemnly. Much cooler than Madison's dad who sells insurance. The tension broke as they all chuckled, momentarily united by this extraordinary child's matter-of-fact planning for a future she was fighting to have. As orderlies arrived to take them to separate procedure rooms, Emma reached for Robert's hand. "See you on the other side," she said, echoing a phrase she'd clearly picked up from medical dramas. "Count on it," Robert promised, squeezing her small fingers gently before letting go. Hours later, groggy from anesthesia and sore from the extraction site, Robert woke to find Sarah sitting beside his recovery bed. "It went perfectly," she said before he could ask. "They're transplanting the marrow now. Emma's doing well." Relief washed over him. "Thank you for letting me do this, for letting me be part of her life." Sarah's expression softened. "She chose you, Robert. I'm just following her lead." She paused. "Besides, some things are meant to be, even if they take detours along the way." 6 weeks after the transplant, Emma sat cross-legged on her hospital bed, a chessboard between her and Robert. Outside, autumn painted Central Park in fiery colors, visible from her room's window. Her hair was growing back in wispy patches, a side effect of the anti-rejection medications. "Check," she announced, moving her bishop with careful precision. Robert studied the board, impressed. "You've been practicing." "Michael brings his laptop when you're at board meetings. We play online." She adjusted her knitted purple beanie, a gift from Robert's executive assistant who had taken to sending weekly care packages. The mention of Michael still triggered a complicated mix of gratitude and jealousy in Robert. The man had been there for all the moments he'd missed, first steps, first words, first day of school. "Your move," Emma prompted, interrupting his thoughts. Robert moved his knight, deliberately setting up a teaching moment. Emma spotted it immediately, capturing his queen with a triumphant grin. "You did that on purpose," she accused. "Prove it," he challenged, enjoying her indignation. The door opened as Sarah entered with Dr. Martinez. The doctor's expression revealed nothing as she reviewed Emma's latest test results. "Well?" Sarah prompted, tension evident in her voice. Dr. Martinez smiled. "The numbers are excellent. The transplant is taking beautifully. Another 2 weeks, and Emma can continue recovery at home with weekly outpatient visits." Emma let out a small whoop, then composed herself with practiced dignity. "Does this mean I can go back to school after Christmas break?" "If things continue this way, yes," the doctor confirmed. After she left, Emma turned to Robert. "That means you won't have to visit me in the hospital anymore." "No," he agreed. "I'll have to visit you at home instead." "And take me to the park," Emma added. "And the museum. And ice skating when I'm stronger." Robert exchanged glances with Sarah, who nodded slightly. "We can arrange that," he promised. Later, as Emma napped, Robert and Sarah walked to the hospital cafeteria in companionable silence, a truce established through their shared focus on Emma's recovery. "We need to talk about the future," Sarah said as they sat with coffee neither really wanted. "Practical arrangements." Robert nodded. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like regular visitation. Weekends, perhaps? Some holidays?" "That would work," Sarah agreed. "Emma needs stability, but she also needs you in her life." She hesitated. "There's something else. The medical bills. The insurance covers most, but not all." "I want to help," Robert said immediately. "Please, let me." Sarah studied him. "This isn't about money, Robert. It's about commitment. If you're in her life now, you're in it completely. No disappearing when things get difficult. I'm not that person anymore, he promised. Aren't you? Sarah challenged gently. The call that made you leave 8 years ago. Would you make a different choice today? The question struck at the heart of their unresolved past. Robert's father's desperate call from the hospital, his mother's condition deteriorating rapidly. The impossible choice between his disintegrating marriage and his dying mother. The decision to leave without proper explanation, too overwhelmed to navigate both crises. Yes, he answered honestly, I would have found a way to handle both. Sarah nodded, accepting his answer without further comment. Emma wants to spend Christmas at home. I'd like you to join us for dinner that day, if you're willing. The invitation, carefully framed and limited, represented a step forward Robert hadn't dared hope for so soon. I'd be honored, he replied simply. As they returned to Emma's room, they found Michael reading to her from the phantom toll booth. He looked up, closing the book as they entered. Just getting to the good part, he explained. Don't stop, Emma protested. Robert hasn't heard this story yet. The three adults exchanged glances, navigating their evolving roles in this child's life. Then Michael reopened the book, continuing the story as Emma snuggled deeper into her pillows, content to have her expanding family together in one room. Snow fell gently outside the window of Sarah's brownstone as Robert rang the doorbell, gifts balanced carefully in his arms. The house was modest but warm, decorated with twinkling lights and handmade ornaments that spoke of years of Christmases he'd missed. Emma answered the door, her face alight with excitement. 2 months post-transplant, her energy was returning, though she remained thin and tired easily. Her hair had grown into a pixie cut that framed her face. "You're here," she exclaimed. "Mom said we couldn't open presents until you arrived. Sorry I'm late," Robert apologized, stepping inside. Last-minute board call. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a festive apron. "Merry Christmas, Robert. Dinner's almost ready." "Do." The formality between them had softened over the weeks of Emma's recovery, their shared concern creating a bridge across the chasm of their past. "Michael's in the living room," Emma informed him, taking one of the packages. "He's been helping me with my science fair project." Robert followed her through to a cozy room where a Christmas tree sparkled with colored lights. Michael stood to greet him, offering a beer. "Glad you could make it," he said with genuine warmth. The relationship between the two men had evolved into a cautious friendship. Michael had stepped back slightly as Robert took on more fatherly duties, finding a new balance that prioritized Emma's needs above any adult awkwardness. "Present time," Emma announced, settling cross-legged by the tree, with the enthusiasm of any 7-year-old at Christmas, despite her medical challenges. They watched as she unwrapped Robert's gift, a telescope with accompanying star charts. Her eyes widened. "Is this professional grade?" "Semi-professional," Robert clarified. "We can set it up on your roof when the weather clears." "Michael, look!" Emma exclaimed, showing him the telescope's features. As the two examined it together, Sarah touched Robert's arm lightly. "Perfect gift. She's been obsessed with astronomy since reading about female astronauts." "I had help," Robert admitted. "My assistant researched age-appropriate models." Sarah smiled. "You're learning." Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair, the adults maintaining conversation around Emma's excited chatter about returning to school in January. "Only half-days at first," Sarah reminded her. "Doctor's orders." "But I'll make it to the science fair," Emma insisted. "My project on bone marrow transplants is going to win first place." Robert raised his eyebrows. "Using your own experience as research?" "Of course," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Primary sources are the most reliable." After dinner, while Emma showed Michael her new telescope by the window, Sarah handed Robert a small package. "From Emma and me," she explained. Inside was a framed photograph of Emma as a newborn, tiny in her NICU incubator. The second item was a USB drive. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything you missed," Sarah said quietly. "First steps, first words, birthdays. I kept digital albums. Emma thought you should have them." Robert stared at the gifts, emotion tightening his throat. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just be here now. That's all that matters." Later, as Robert prepared to leave, Emma hugged him fiercely. "Best Christmas ever," she declared. "We're just getting started," he promised, realizing as he said it that he meant every word. On the doorstep, Sarah paused before closing the door. "Happy New Year, Robert. See you at Emma's doctor appointment on Thursday." "Wouldn't miss it," he assured her, watching as snowflakes gathered on her hair. For a moment he glimpsed the young woman he'd fallen in love with years ago, resilient, determined, kind, despite life's hardships. But the moment passed, and Sarah smiled politely before closing the door. Some bridges, Robert reflected as he walked to his car, took longer to rebuild than others. But for Emma's sake, and perhaps for their own, it was worth the effort. Spring arrived with a burst of color in Central Park. Emma raced ahead on the path, her energy fully restored after 6 months of recovery. Behind her, Robert and Sarah walked side by side, watching their daughter with shared pride. "Dr. Martinez says her latest tests are perfect," Sarah reported. "Better than they dared hope." "That's wonderful," Robert replied, his relief palpable. The fear of rejection or complications had shadowed them through the winter months, but Emma had proven as resilient in recovery as she was determined in chess. "She's invited half her class to her birthday party next month," Sarah continued, "including Madison, who's apparently forgiven her for the sleepover deception." Robert smiled. 8 years old. Hard to believe. "Try living through all 8, Sarah said, but her tone held no bitterness now. They'd established a routine over the months. Robert took Emma every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. He'd purchased an apartment 10 minutes from Sarah's home, converting the second bedroom into a space that reflected Emma's evolving interests: astronomy, chess, and most recently, computer programming. "I've been meaning to ask," Robert ventured. "About Michael." Sarah glanced at him. "What about him?" "What?" "I noticed he hasn't been around as much lately." A complicated expression crossed Sarah's face. "Michael needed some space to figure out his role in all this." "I never meant to push him out," Robert said carefully. "He's been important to Emma, to both of you." "It's complicated," Sarah admitted. "For 8 years it was the 3 of us. Now it's different." Ahead, Emma had stopped to examine a butterfly perched on a flowering bush. The spring sunlight caught her hair, now grown into a bob that curled slightly at her chin. "I owe him a debt I can never repay," Robert said quietly, "for being there when I wasn't." Sarah touched his arm briefly. "He knows that." She hesitated. "There's something you should know about Michael and me." Before she could continue, Emma called out, waving them forward excitedly. "Dad! Mom! Come see this chrysalis!" The word Dad still sent a thrill of wonder through Robert each time Emma used it. The transition had happened naturally over the months of his involvement, moving from Robert to Dad without ceremony or discussion. They joined Emma by the bush, admiring the delicate chrysalis hanging from a branch. "It's a monarch," Emma informed them authoritatively. "We learned about metamorphosis in science class. Inside, it's completely breaking down and rebuilding itself into something new." Sarah and Robert exchanged glances over their daughter's head, the metaphor not lost on either of them. "Change can be beautiful," Sarah observed. "But it takes time," Robert added. Emma looked between them. "Are you guys talking about butterflies or something else?" "Both, maybe," Sarah replied with a small smile. Later, after ice cream and a visit to the Natural History Museum, Robert walked them back to Sarah's brownstone. Emma raced inside to call Madison about their butterfly sighting, leaving the adults momentarily alone on the stoop. "What were you going to tell me about you and Michael?" Robert asked. Sarah sighed. "Michael asked me to marry him last year before Emma found you." The revelation shouldn't have surprised Robert, yet it did. "And you said?" "I said I needed time," Sarah replied. "Then everything changed when Emma found you." She met his gaze directly. "He's a good man, Robert. He loves Emma like his own." "I know," Robert acknowledged. "Are you going to accept?" Sarah looked toward the door, where their daughter had disappeared. "I don't know yet. Everything's different now. We're all finding our way in this new reality." Robert nodded, understanding the complexity of their intertwined lives. "Whatever happens, Emma comes first. We agree on that." "Always," Sarah confirmed. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Robert, for becoming the father she always needed." As he walked away, Robert reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From isolated CEO to co-parent, from stranger to father. The chrysalis Emma had shown them seemed an apt symbol for them all, breaking down old structures to build something new and perhaps more beautiful. The ballroom of the Westfield Hotel sparkled once again with tiny lights, almost exactly 1 year after Emma had first approached Robert on this same dance floor. Now they entered together, Emma's hand tucked confidently in his as they made their way through the Children's Hospital annual charity ball. "There's Dr. Martinez," Emma pointed out, waving to her oncologist who was speaking with hospital administrators. At 8 years old, Emma carried herself with the poise of someone much older, her purple dress, her favorite color still, chosen specifically for this symbolic evening. The past year had transformed her from patient to advocate. She'd raised over $5,000 for the oncology ward through her school's charity drive, inspired by her own experience. "Mr. Anderson," called the event coordinator, "we're so pleased you increased Pinnacle's donation this year. The new children's wing will make such a difference." "It was the least I could do," Robert replied, meaning it. The past year had shifted his priorities dramatically. He'd restructured his work schedule, delegated more responsibility to his executive team, and focused Pinnacle's charitable foundation on pediatric medical research. As they circulated through the crowd, Robert noticed Michael entering with Sarah. Though initially awkward, Michael's presence at family events had gradually normalized as they all adjusted to their new dynamics. He'd accepted a position running Pinnacle's charitable foundation, bridging his roles in both Robert's and Emma's lives. The orchestra began playing a waltz, the same one that had been playing when Emma first approached Robert with her life-changing question. "May I have this dance?" Emma asked formally, extending her hand just as she had a year ago. "I would be honored," Robert replied, leading her to the dance floor. Emma no longer needed to count steps under her breath. They moved with practiced ease, having taken father-daughter dance lessons together for months in preparation for this night. "Remember when I surprised you here last year?" Emma asked, looking up at him. "How could I forget? You turned my whole life upside down." "For the better, right?" she prompted with a grin. "Infinitely better," he assured her. Across the room, Sarah watched them with Michael beside her. Robert caught her eye, and she smiled, a genuine smile that acknowledged how far they'd all come. Later, as Emma chatted with Dr. Martinez about her latest fundraising ideas, Sarah joined Robert by the refreshment table. "She's remarkably poised," Sarah observed. "Hard to believe this is the same girl who snuck out to find her father a year ago." "She gets that from you," Robert replied. "The determination, the courage." Sarah accepted the compliment with a nod. "We made quite a remarkable person between us, didn't we?" "We did," Robert agreed. Sarah about Michael's proposal. "I turned him down," she said quietly. "Last month." Robert's surprise must have shown on his face. Not because of you, Sarah clarified quickly, because I realized I've been defining myself as Emma's mother for so long that I've lost track of who Sarah is. And she glanced toward Michael, who was now laughing with Emma. He understood. We're still friends. And you're okay? Robert asked. Sarah smiled. I'm going back to school. Nurse practitioner program. Something I've wanted to do since Emma's diagnosis. That's wonderful, Robert said sincerely. You'll be excellent. Emma's illness changed us all, Sarah observed, made us re-evaluate what matters. Robert nodded, watching their daughter demonstrate a dance move to Michael. I never thanked you properly for letting me be part of her life after everything. You're her father, Sarah said simply. That never changed, even when you were absent. The orchestra shifted to a new song, and Emma bounded back to them. Dad, they're playing the father-daughter special dance. Come on. As Robert allowed himself to be pulled back to the dance floor, he caught sight of their reflection in the mirrored wall, so different from a year ago. Now, instead of shock and disbelief, his face showed something he hadn't expected to find again, contentment. Dad, Emma said as they danced, I have a question. Another life-altering one? He teased. Maybe, she replied with surprising seriousness. Do you think you and Mom will ever get back together, like as a couple? Mum, the question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? Emma shrugged with attempted casualness. Madison's parents got divorced and then remarried each other. She says it happens sometimes. Robert considered his answer carefully. Your mom and I care about each other because we both love you. But sometimes people are better as friends and co-parents than as a couple. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. I just thought I'd ask. As the dance ended, Robert marveled at his daughter's continuing ability to surprise him with her perceptiveness and courage to ask difficult questions directly. Some things, it seemed, never changed. 2 years after Emma's bone marrow transplant, Robert stood in the backyard of Sarah's brownstone, helping Michael set up tables for Emma's 10th birthday party. The summer afternoon was perfect, clear skies, gentle breeze, and the excited chatter of children exploring the elaborate astronomy-themed decorations. Emma said you're taking her to space camp next month, Michael commented as they unfolded chairs. She's been counting down the days, Robert confirmed. Apparently, I'm in for a week of freeze-dried ice cream and zero-gravity simulations. Michael laughed. Better you than me. I did my time at science camp last summer. Their relationship had evolved into a genuine friendship, the initial awkwardness giving way to mutual respect and shared commitment to Emma's happiness. Inside the house, Emma directed operations with characteristic precision, instructing her friends where to place gifts and which activities came first. At 10, she retained the directness that had first led her to approach Robert, now channeled into leadership roles at school and her continuing advocacy for pediatric cancer patients. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a spectacular cake designed like the solar system, her nursing scrubs exchanged for a summer dress. The nurse practitioner program had been demanding but fulfilling, and she'd recently accepted a position at the same hospital where Emma had been treated. The guest of honor requests your presence for cake, she informed Robert and Michael. Something about the astronomical significance of this exact moment. They gathered around as Emma explained the perfect alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, visible that night, the reason she'd insisted on an evening party despite Sarah's concerns about sugar-hyped children up past bedtime. Make a wish, stargazer, Robert encouraged, as Emma prepared to blow out her candles. I don't need to, she replied with a smile that illuminated her entire face. I already got what I wished for. Later, after the party wound down and the last guests departed, the four of them, Robert, Sarah, Michael and Emma, sat on the back porch, watching as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Which one is Jupiter again? Michael asked, squinting upward. Emma pointed with exaggerated patience. The bright one to the left of the moon, Saturn's fainter just beside it. Robert watched his daughter's animated explanation of celestial mechanics, marveling at how her fight for health had transformed into a passion for understanding the universe. The frightened child in the hospital bed seemed distant now, replaced by this vibrant, curious person on the cusp of adolescence. "I have something for you," he said, when Emma paused for breath. "An early birthday present." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter confirming a donation to the Children's Hospital in Emma's name, funding for a new pediatric research initiative focused on rare blood disorders. "They're calling it the Emma Anderson Fellowship," he explained, "supporting young researchers working on treatments like the one that helped you." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Like scientists will be doing research because of me?" "Because of you," Robert confirmed. "Your courage inspired a lot of people, Emma, including me." She launched herself into his arms with the spontaneous affection that still caught him by surprise sometimes. "Thank you, Dad." Sarah's eyes met Robert's over their daughter's head, sharing a moment of quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd all come. As Emma raced inside to show Michael her latest telescope modifications, Sarah moved to sit beside Robert. "You know what today is, besides her birthday?" she asked. Robert nodded. 3 years since she found me at the charity ball. "Best thing that ever happened to all of us," Sarah said softly, "though I wouldn't have believed it at the time." "Life has a way of surprising us," Robert agreed. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars brighten against the deepening blue. The past 3 years had brought challenges, adjustments, and inevitable missteps as they learned to co-parent. But through it all, Emma had thrived, physically, emotionally, academically, surrounded by 3 adults who put her welfare above their own complicated histories. "She asked me yesterday if we'd ever tell her the full story," Sarah commented, "about why you left, about everything that happened before she was born." "What did you tell her?" "That when she's older, we'll explain everything together." Sarah glanced at him. "She deserves the whole truth eventually." Robert nodded. "When she's ready." He paused. "Do you ever wonder how different things might have been if I'd stayed? If I'd known about her from the beginning?" Sarah considered this. "Sometimes. But then we wouldn't be who we are now. And I think who we are now is exactly who Emma needs us to be." Inside, Emma's laughter rang out as she showed Michael something on her computer, probably the space camp itinerary she'd been meticulously planning. "You know what she told me last week?" Robert said. "That she's glad things happened the way they did. That if I'd been around all along, she might never have needed the bone marrow transplant that fixed her blood forever." Sarah smiled, though her eyes glistened slightly. "Leave it to Emma to find the silver lining in everything." As the first stars fully emerged, Emma burst back onto the porch, telescope in hand. "Jupiter's visible! Come see!" They gathered around as she adjusted the focus, each taking turns to peer through the lens at the distant planet. Emma's enthusiasm was contagious, her joy complete in the presence of her unconventional but devoted family. Some journeys, Robert reflected as he watched his daughter name the visible stars, began with a simple question and led to destinations never imagined. 3 years ago, a brave little girl had asked him to dance. In doing so, she'd led him to the most meaningful role of his life, being her father. "Make a wish, Dad," Emma urged as a shooting star streaked across the sky. Robert smiled, his hand finding Sarah's in the darkness as Emma leaned against his shoulder. "I don't need to," he echoed his daughter's earlier words. "I already have everything I could wish for."